One summer's day, in a small house near the woods, there lived a little girl whose name was Goldilocks. "Goldilocks, where are you?" "I'm in the garden, Mama." "Well, don't go away. Your meal will be ready soon, and don't play in the woods." "No, Mama." Goldilocks stood very still and looked around and realized she was lost. Nearby, in a tiny cottage in the woods, there lived a family of 3 bears: a daddy bear, a mummy bear, and a wee baby bear. "Come along," said Mummy Bear. "This porridge is far too hot. We'll take a little walk before breakfast." Goldilocks, seeing a balloon floating over the trees, started off down the path towards it. Very soon she came across the bear's cottage. "Hello, is anyone at home?" said Goldilocks. Finding herself inside a strange house, she was a little frightened. She was also very hungry. She dipped into the big bowl of porridge, but it was far too hot. Then she tried the middle-sized bowl, but it was all gooey. But when she tried the baby bowl, it was just right, and she gobbled it all up. She felt much better now, and decided that nice people must live there, and they would surely show her the way home when they returned. She looked for somewhere to sit. The big daddy chair was too high. The middle-sized mummy chair was far too soft. Then she tried the baby chair. It was just right. She was so pleased she began to rock backwards and forwards until suddenly she looked at the broken chair and remembered the times her mummy had told her not to rock in her chair in case she fell. Well, now she had fallen and broken the chair. She looked out of the window to see if anyone was coming, but no one was in sight. Sadly, she turned away and climbed the stairs and found herself in a big bedroom. There was a big daddy bed, a middle-sized mummy bed, and a wee baby bed. Feeling sleepy, she tried to climb on the big daddy bed. It was very high and very hard. So she tried the middle-sized mummy bed, but it was too soft, and the cover was so slippery she slid off onto the floor. And then she lay on the baby bed, and it was just right. In fact, it was so comfortable she fell fast asleep. Meanwhile, the bears had returned from their walk. The big daddy bear peered into his bowl and said, "Who's been eating my porridge?" The middle-sized mummy bear said, "And someone's been eating my porridge," while the little bear cried, for someone had eaten all of his porridge, every bit. The big daddy bear went to his chair and said, "Someone's been sitting on my chair." "Now, someone has been sitting on my chair," said the middle-sized mummy bear. And the wee baby bear cried again and said, "Someone's been sitting on my chair and has broken off the legs." The bears were puzzled. They decided to look upstairs. The big daddy bear looked at his bed and said, "Someone's been lying on my bed." The middle-sized mummy bear said crossly, "Someone's been lying on my bed," while the wee baby bear cried out, "Someone's been sleeping on my bed, and there she is." Poor Goldilocks woke up suddenly. "Oh dear, she cried, and she was so frightened she jumped straight out of the window. She ran down the path and into the woods as fast as she could, and she didn't stop running until she saw her tiny teddy bear lying on the ground. Looking up, she saw her garden gate. Quickly she ran inside, just in time to hear her mother calling, "Goldilocks, Goldilocks, where are you?" So Goldilocks went inside and ate her lunch, which was just right, and never wandered into the woods again. There once lived a miller, much given to boasting about his daughter, a pretty but modest girl called Anna. He would say things like, "She can sing like a bird and dance like sunlight on the water." The miller's friends and neighbors listened to his boasting, and as they liked Anna, they merely smiled politely and said nothing. One day, however, unnoticed by the miller, a stranger listened to his stories and heard him say, "Why, my daughter spins so fine she could spin straw into gold." The stranger, who was a messenger from the palace, left hurriedly to report this extraordinary news to the king. Naturally, the king was intrigued and summoned Anna to attend the court. The coach was sent to fetch her, and the miller was prouder than ever to think that his daughter should be so honored. But Anna was sad at leaving home. On arrival at the palace, she was brought before the king. He looked at her sternly and said, "Your father boasts that you can spin straw into gold. Well, tonight you shall spin for me. I have set aside a room full of straw and a spinning wheel, and if by the morning the straw has not changed to gold, you shall surely die. For no one may make a fool of the king." Poor Anna was locked in the room and began to weep, for she knew that her father's boasting had brought her to this fate, and there was nothing that she could do to save herself. She was startled, therefore, to hear a voice. "Well now, my pretty, dry your tears, for I can take away your fears." And there stood beside her an ugly dwarf. Anna was too frightened even to scream. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" she whispered. "Never mind," said the dwarf. "Just know that I can save your life, but first you must give me something precious to you." At first, Anna could think of nothing of value she could give the dwarf. But then she said, "I have only a necklace of worthless beads, but it is precious to me, as it came from my grandmother, whom I loved dearly." "That will suffice," said the dwarf, putting it in his pouch. "Now rest while I set about my work." Anna fell asleep almost immediately, and when she awoke in the morning, the dwarf had gone, and the room was full of spun gold. When the king saw the gold, he was delighted, but he was also greedy, so he said that the following night she must stay in a larger room filled with straw, which she must spin into gold before she could leave. Anna was too frightened to protest, and that evening she wept bitterly, fearing that nothing could save her. But as she wept, she heard the dwarf's voice again, saying, "You've lived to see another night, but only I can help your plight." "Oh," cried Anna, "please help me as you did before." "What precious gift can you give me?" asked the dwarf. Desperately, Anna showed him a plain brass ring on her finger. "This simple ring given to me by my poor departed mother is all I have," she said. "Give it to me," said the dwarf. And no sooner had he taken it than Anna fell sound asleep again. The following morning, the king arrived and was amazed to find all the straw transformed into gold. But instead of giving Anna her freedom, he said, "I have just one more task for you. Tonight I shall fill the great hall with straw, and if you can spin that into gold, I shall reward you by making you queen. But if you fail..." Poor Anna. She looked around the great hall stacked with straw and feared that this time there was no hope. But the dwarf appeared again and said, "Your task is greater than before. You need my skills to spin the straw." "Oh," cried Anna, "can you really spin all this straw?" "Of course," growled the dwarf. "But what will you give me?" "Alas, I have nothing," said Anna. "What am I to do?" The dwarf looked at her and said, "When you are queen, the king will expect a son and heir. Promise to give me the baby, and I will help you tonight." "Yes, yes," said Anna hastily. "Whatever you wish, but please help me now." "Very well," said the dwarf. "Now close your eyes while I set about my work." When she awoke in the morning, to her amazement, the hall was full of gold. When the king arrived, he looked at the gold and smiled. "Make plans for a royal wedding," he commanded. "A girl with talents such as these is surely fit to be queen." The seasons passed, and within a year, Queen Anna gave birth to a beautiful boy, and there was great rejoicing throughout the land. One night, as the queen sat alone in the nursery with her child, a cloud passed over the moon, and from a darkened corner of the room a voice said, "I saved your life with gold spun fine, and now your promised child is mine." The queen stared at the figure of the dwarf whom she had long ago forgotten. "Oh, but you cannot mean to take my baby from me," she cried. "Let me reward you in some other way." "Is not your child your most precious possession?" asked the dwarf. "Oh, yes." "Then this is what I must have," he snarled. But after a moment he cocked his head to one side and said, "I'll play with you a sporting game, if you can but divine my name. The child will then be yours to keep. If not, then my reward I'll reap." Then before the queen could answer, he had gone. All next day the queen brooded on names that might fit the dwarf, and in the evening she waited alone in her room for the dwarf to return. Sure enough, when the clouds covered the moon, the dwarf appeared as before and said, "You know the question is the same. Can you tell me what's my name?" The queen tried all the names she had gathered, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, then Peter, Paul, Patrick, but the dwarf just laughed and said, "When the moon comes into sight, I shall return tomorrow night." Then he disappeared again. The next day, the queen instructed her messengers, foresters, and huntsmen to search the land to discover the name of the dwarf. But at the end of the day, none had returned with any news. When the dwarf appeared again that night, she tried desperately to guess his name. Could it be Long Nose, Squint Eyes, Potbelly, or perhaps Dog Ears, Bandy Legs, or Flatfoot? She asked. But the dwarf merely laughed as before and chanted, "Tomorrow night is your last chance, or with your child away I'll dance." The queen was distraught with worry. Once again her servants were charged with scouring the country in search of the dwarf, and rewards were offered for any information. But it was not until late in the day that a breathless messenger arrived with a strange tale to tell. "Your Majesty," he said, "I had ridden hard across the length and the breadth of the kingdom without success, and was resting deep in the forest when I heard a strange sound nearby. I found my way to a clearing, and there I saw a strange creature dancing and singing." Go on," cried the queen urgently. "What did he sing?" "For you I spin the finest gold, and now your precious child I'll hold. You cannot hope to win the game, for Rumpelstitskin is my name." "That must be the answer," cried the queen. "Go and rest now, and tomorrow you shall receive your reward." Later, when the dwarf appeared again, the queen was ready. The dwarf chanted, "You know the question is the same. Can you tell me what's my name?" The queen pretended not to know the true name and said, "Could it be Padawacky, or Pollylillo, or maybe Cockalory?" The dwarf laughed and was just about to snatch the baby from the cradle when the queen said, "Wait! Is it Rumpelstiltskin?" The dwarf was furious, and in his anger he stamped so hard he fell through the floor and perished in the moat deep below. The queen clasped her baby in her arms and vowed that he would grow up never to boast foolishly. And he never did. One bright summer's morning, a woodcutter set off from his house on the edge of the forest. In the house, a little girl watched her mother preparing food, which she packed carefully into a basket. The little girl was called Little Red Riding Hood, as she always wore a red cape with a hood that her clever mother had made for her. When the basket was finished, Red Riding Hood's mother called her and said, "Here's a basket of freshly baked cakes and bread which I want you to take to your grandmother, who has not been well. Take care as you go through the wood, stick to the path, and don't stop to talk to strangers on the way. And when you've seen grandmother, hurry back and let me know how she is." "Yes, Mama," said Red Riding Hood, and went on her way. She began to wend her way through the wood, where she had been many times before with her father, the woodcutter. The birds and the small animals that lived in the wood followed her, for they were not afraid of her. After a while, she stopped to pick some flowers, thinking that they would make a nice present for her grandmother. Then she saw some prettier flowers among the trees away from the forest path. She became so excited, finding prettier and prettier flowers, that she quite forgot her mother's advice to stick to the path and didn't even notice when all the little animals scurried away. So when a shadow fell across her path, she was quite surprised to see a tall stranger standing next to her. "Good morning, my child," he said. He was a big, bad wolf. But Red Riding Hood didn't know this and answered politely, "Good morning, sir." "Tell me, my dear," said the wolf, "where are you off to on this fine day?" "I'm off to visit my grandmother who lives in the woods," said Red Riding Hood. "But I fear I have lost my way." "And what do you have in your basket?" inquired the wolf. "Oh, freshly baked cakes and bread for grandmother," said Red Riding Hood. "And your grandmother, does she live alone?" asked the wolf. "Oh, yes, quite alone," said the little girl. The wolf looked at the basket and licked his lips, for he was very hungry. But he thought, if I can wait a while, I might make an even better meal. So he said, "Well now, allow me to lead you back to the path so that you can continue on your way." "Thank you," said Red Riding Hood, as he led her back to the path. "Now, does your grandmother live far from here?" asked the wolf. "Not very far," said Red Riding Hood. "In the little cottage by the old mill, and she keeps the door on the latch so that I can easily enter." "Oh, splendid, splendid," cried the wolf, licking his lips and swishing his tail. "Off you go, then. Give my best wishes to your grandmother, and I hope she tastes, I mean, feels better." "Thank you kindly," said Red Riding Hood, and she waved goodbye as she went down the path towards her grandmother's cottage. Now the wicked wolf knew the woods well, and ran off using a shortcut that brought him to the cottage long before Red Riding Hood. He peered in at the window to see if the old woman was really alone, and then he knocked on the door. "Who is there?" "It is me, Red Riding Hood, with some food from Mama," said the wolf. "Lift up the latch and come in, my dear," said the old lady. The wolf opened the door and leapt towards the bed. The old lady was so frightened she fainted clean away. The wolf was about to eat her there and then, but his sharp ears picked up the sound of Red Riding Hood approaching through the woods, so he quickly bundled the old lady into a closet, dressed himself in her nightgown and cap, and jumped into bed. Red Riding Hood approached the cottage and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" cried the wolf, pretending to be the old lady. "It is Red Riding Hood with some food for you from Mama," said the little girl. "Lift up the latch and come in," said the wolf, snuggling down under the bedclothes. Red Riding Hood opened the door and peered in. It was not very light in the cottage, but you could just see the old lady's nightcap lying on the pillow. "I hope you're feeling better," said Red Riding Hood as she approached the bed. The wolf did not answer, but his eyes gleamed. "Why, what big eyes you have," said Red Riding Hood. "All the better to see you with," said the wolf. Then Red Riding Hood noticed the strange shape of Grandmother's nightcap and said, "What big ears you have, Grandmother." "All the better to hear you with," said the wolf, and the bedclothes slipped down to show his big snout. "My goodness, what big teeth you have!" cried Red Riding Hood in alarm. "All the better to eat you with," snarled the wolf. Suddenly, the door burst open, and there stood the woodcutter with his axe. The wolf glared at the woodcutter, but he knew that he stood no chance against that mighty axe, so he leapt through the window and he ran for his life, never to be seen again. Red Riding Hood was so frightened she was crying and trembling. Her father put down his axe to comfort her. Then they heard a noise from the closet. The woodcutter opened the door, and there was poor frightened Grandmama, wrapped in a shawl. After they'd comforted her and put her back into bed and given her the cakes and bread to eat, she felt much better. Then Red Riding Hood and her father left the cottage and made their way home safely. But from that day on, Red Riding Hood took care not to stray from the path and learnt to be on her guard with smooth-talking strangers. long time ago, there lived a king and a queen who were well and truly loved by those they ruled. But in spite of having all that money could buy, there was one thing above all else that they did not have that they very much desired, and that was a child of their own. As years passed, they had become more and more sad about it. One day, as the queen was bathing in a pool, a strange thing happened. A frog popped out of the water and landed on a leaf next to her and said, "O Queen, be happy, for within a year your dearest wish will be fulfilled." The queen thought she must have imagined it, but within a year, true to the frog's prediction, the queen bore a child. The king and queen were so full of joy that they declared it a holiday so that all might rejoice in their wondrous news. The kingdom would celebrate with a great feast. The king invited guests from far and wide, and of these the most important were 6 fairies, who had the power to bestow great gifts upon the child. When the guests had sat down for their feast in the great hall, the 6 wise fairies then, each in turn, gave their gifts. The first said, "She shall blossom full and fair, with beauty that's beyond compare. As well as being fair of face, she'll be endowed with natural grace. She will sing and dance with ease, and everyone she meets will please. She'll see the world through knowing eyes, and grow up to be truly wise." The 5th fairy then said, "With wit and charm she will beguile all those upon she'll choose to smile." Suddenly a most terrible thing happened. A 7th fairy appeared. She had been forgotten by all for a long time. In fact, most thought she had died.
"Am I not a worthy guest to be invited to your feast to celebrate this happy time for which you've waited so long?"
"1,000 apologies, madam, if in haste of our celebrations we have made an oversight. Let it now be in the past, and please, be welcome."
"Then perhaps I might also add my blessings to this baby and make it a celebration that no one will forget. You would not invite me to the feast, but I have come just the same, and I brought a gift. On her 15th birthday, she will prick her finger on a spinning wheel and she will fall down dead."
At that moment, the 6th fairy stepped forward and said, "Cry not, my queen, for I have yet to bless the child, and though my powers cannot undo the evil spell cast on her, I can make it so that she merely falls asleep for 100 years. The fairy then said, "Princess, blessed with many virtues, evil spells now cannot hurt you. 100 years to you will seem a passing moment in a dream. You will awaken with a kiss to fulfill your life of bliss, and what the evil spell has cast will be forgotten in the past." But the king, fearful of the spell, made a proclamation there and then that all spinning wheels were to be banned from the kingdom henceforth. The years passed, and the king and the queen found great joy in their child, and all who knew her loved her. The princess had never been told of the fearful spell laid upon her, but on the 15th anniversary of that day, the king forbade the princess to stray from the castle. In a playful mood, the princess teased her guardian with a game of hide-and-seek, hiding first here, then there, till at last she found herself in the topmost room of the castle, a room that she had never visited before. She went to hide behind the dusty tapestry, and there noticed a small door, just the place to hide. Behind the door was a room, and inside was an old lady dressed in a shawl and working with something that the princess had never seen before, a spinning wheel. "What are you doing, old woman?" asked the princess.
"I'm spinning, my dear, and waiting for you."
The princess stepped closer and touched the spindle, which pricked her finger. She was taken to her room and laid on a bed of flower petals. It was at this moment of grief that the good fairy appeared once more, and with a wave of her hands cast a spell over the whole castle and its grounds. The fountain stopped as if frozen. The flames of the fire remained motionless. The steam from the kettle stayed in the air as if painted, and the page boy's sneeze was stifled for 100 years. The briars, brambles, and vines grew to shroud the castle from view and form a barrier to all who would trespass in it. It was truly a mystery to those who lived nearby, but time passed and its mystery became part legend, part myth, oft told to children at bedtime. Now, one of those children was the son of the king who ruled a neighboring kingdom. He grew to be a handsome prince and often hunted in the fields and woods that surrounded the old castle. One day, in pursuit of a stag, he found himself by the briars and brambles of the castle. Seeking the stag within the tangled mesh, he took his sword to cut a path through the branches, and then, much to his astonishment, a path opened in front of him. As if led by some invisible hand, the prince ascended the stairs and found himself by a half-open door. He peeped in. Then, gazing through the dim-lit room, he saw the princess. Her beauty was such that just to gaze upon her made him fall madly in love with her. He gently kissed her, and at that moment the spell was broken. She smiled as though she knew him, as of course she did from her dreams. The palace immediately became alive as though not a fraction of time had passed, and all was as it was before. The prince took the princess for his bride, and she became the much-loved queen of the fairies' predictions. Her fairy gift stood her in good stead, and one day she had children of her own. Being wise and loved, she never forgot to invite anyone to celebrations.